Hello, my name is Carmen Gonzalez, and today I'll be talking about a Salmonella St. Paul outbreak that occurred in 2009 that were linked back to alfalfa sprouts. So, step one, the background. Salmonella is a group of bacteria that is a common cause for foodborne illness, and that is because salmonella occurs when food or water is contaminated. And some of the symptoms include a fever, cramps, and diarrhea, and the illness usually lasts from 4 to 7 days. So, step two, the current situation. Illnesses began in early February of 2009, peaked in early March, and dwindled down in April of 2009. This was a multi state outbreak, and Nebraska had the highest number of reported cases, which was 111 out of 235. And because of such high numbers, investigations in state and local public health officials, including the Nebraska Department of Health and Human Services, intervened and did case patient interviews, case control studies, lab testing of the fecal matter from the infected patients, inspection of sprouting facilities to see the root of where the bacteria was coming from, whether it was from the people who grew the seeds, who produced the seeds, or harvested the alfalfa sprouts, and environmental investigation of restaurants, which went hand in hand with the case control studies because public officials interviewed infected patients and were trying to find a common link between what was infecting them, and they found that it was alfalfa sprouts being served at a single restaurant. This is just a continuation of step two, which is my SWOT analysis. A strength was that doing the case patient interviews allowed for public health officials to trace back the source of where the bacteria was coming from. A weakness is that Salmonella St. Paul is not common. Salmonella comes in many forms, and because it isn't a common serotype, it was strange for officials to recognize this as an outbreak. So, step three, the core issues. After all the investigations, the salmonella infections were traced back to seeds identified with the prefix 032 by Seed Company B. They were sold in many states and accounted for the alfalfa sprouts outbreak. Because of this, Seed Company B voluntarily withdrew all the seeds from the market that started with 032. The alfalfa seeds might have been contaminated in several ways, but the exact method was unknown. Some possible causes include contaminated water, improperly composted manure as fertilizer, fecal contamination from animals, runoff from animal production facilities, and improperly cleaned equipment. So, step four, the alternatives. Here I included the health belief model, which is a model that assumes that people are rational in their thoughts. Because of this, I came up with two approaches so that consumers can minimize the chances of contaminating their harvest and their production, and so that consumers can avoid being infected with salmonella when eating alfalfa sprouts. Here are my recommendations. Consumers should not eat alfalfa sprouts raw because if you don't cook them, there's no way to kill the salmonella bacteria. Recommendation 2 is that any sprouts being eaten should be cooked thoroughly, which means they should be cooked in the right temperature so that they can kill any possible bacteria present. Recommendation 3 is that young children, the elderly, and people with compromised immune systems stay away. Step 6, my action plan. Growers should maintain management with lot numbers so that they can trace back the source and test waters on a regular basis. Seed companies should inspect for torn bags and rodent evidence under UV light. Facilities should soak alfalfa seeds for 15 minutes in a 20,000 ppm chlorine solution from calcium hypochlorite. This ensures that the alfalfa seeds are cleaned properly under FDA regulations. Retailers, by 2017, should simply change their labeling so that they can caution consumers to wash and cook sprouts before consumption properly. And lastly, step 7, which is my opinion. I think this can be avoided is by proper monitoring of animal runoff. A lot of farms are shared between animals and the produce that the farmers are growing. And to minimize infections, farmers should properly monitor and make sure that the animal runoff is not being mixed in with the water being used to grow the alfalfa sprouts. So it's important that animal runoff is carefully monitored. I also think you can never be too careful with what you eat because you're never too sure where it's coming from. So it's important to really exaggerate the cleaning and cooking process before consuming alfalfa sprouts. What I mean by this is not simply just dipping your vegetables under the sink for 5 seconds, but really laminating it and making sure that all the possible pathogens contained in it is removed. Lastly, consumers can just avoid eating alfalfa sprouts just to minimize the risks of them getting a salmonella infection. For example, when Chipotle came out with their E. coli outbreak, I was really devastated because I love burrito bowls and I love putting steak in my burrito bowls, but because of all the stories and reports about all the hospitalizations, I just avoided getting it since then. Even before doing this presentation, I didn't know that alfalfa sprouts had a huge risk of salmonella contamination. But now that I know this, I will avoid alfalfa sprouts because I used to love putting them in my sandwiches. But after doing my research, I will just avoid it so that I can minimize my risks of having salmonella infection.